The Old Galactic Republic is, no doubt, the most fascinating era in galactic history, a golden age of connection where the light of the Jedi sought to guide civilization through peace and knowledge. But a dream casts a shadow, and the greatest dreams are the ones the Sith desire most to corrupt. In this video, we're exploring the complete timeline of the Old Republic, an era that lasts over 24,000 years, which is honestly insane. So, sit back, grab a snack, and trust me, this might just be one of the best Star Wars experiences you've ever had. So, 25 millennia back, the galaxy was basically a bunch of scattered worlds in what we call the core. These planets, Coruscant, Corellia, Alderaan, Chandrila, they were the first ones to crack the code on faster-than-light travel, and when they did, man, did things get interesting fast. Now, we need to talk about Coruscant, because this planet becomes the literal center of galactic civilization. But why? What made this rock so special? Honestly, location. Coruscant sat at this perfect intersection of hyperspace routes that were being discovered. If you wanted to travel anywhere in the core, you probably went through Coruscant at some point. It was like the galaxy's main airport, and the people there, they were smart enough to realize what they had. See, these early core worlds could have gone to war. They could have tried to conquer each other, claim territory, all the usual empire-building nonsense we see throughout history. And I'm sure some of them tried. They chose cooperation instead. The first attempts were pretty basic. Trade agreements mostly. One planet's got resources, another's got technology. Let's make a deal. Then it evolved into mutual defense pacts. Your planet gets attacked by space pirates. We'll help you out. Makes sense when you're all relatively close together and facing the same threats. Diplomacy became the name of the game. Representatives from different worlds actually sat down and talked to each other. Wild concept, I know. They established communication protocols, trade standards, navigational charts. Basically, they were creating the infrastructure for what would become the largest government in galactic history. And then came the big moment, the year 25,053 BBY. The Galactic Constitution gets signed. Representatives from the core worlds gather on Coruscant and basically say, all right, we're doing this. One galaxy, one government, one unified republic. The Constitution promised a lot of beautiful things. Every member world gets representation in the Senate. No one planet rules over another. Disputes get settled through debate and voting, not warfare. Trade flows freely. Knowledge gets shared. The whole galaxy would prosper together. Man, the idealism back then must have been off the charts. Can you imagine being there for that signing? The hope in the room? A galaxy united in peace and prosperity. That was the dream. One government that would bring stability, fairness, and progress to every inhabited world. They genuinely believed they were creating something that would last forever. A government built on consent, representation, and mutual respect. The core worlds were thriving under this system, so obviously it would work for everyone else, right? Well, the Galactic Republic worked great if you lived in the core. Coruscant? Absolutely flourishing. Corellia? Building ships that would dominate galactic trade for millennia. Alderaan? Becoming a center of art, culture, and learning. These worlds had wealth, influence, and all the benefits that came with being at the center of power. But the farther you got from Coruscant, the less the Republic seemed to care about you. The Mid-Rim got some attention, sure, but the Outer Rim, the frontier worlds, they might as well have not existed. Think about it from their perspective. You're a colonist on some distant world, working your tail off to survive. You pay your taxes to the Republic. You follow their laws. You wave their flag. And what do you get in return? Nothing. No infrastructure, no protection from pirates or slavers, no representation that actually matters, because by the time your voice reaches the Senate on Coruscant, it's been drowned out by 1,000 core world senators with way more political clout. The Republic took from the Outer Rim constantly. Resources, taxes, labor, but they never gave back. No trade routes to connect distant worlds. No military presence to keep people safe. The Jedi? Yeah, they'd show up sometimes, but there weren't nearly enough of them to police an entire galaxy. So while Coruscant was building monuments and the core worlds were throwing fancy parties, the Rim was lawless. Warlords, crime syndicates, and corporations with private armies filled the power vacuum, because when the government doesn't protect you, someone else will, for a price. So we talked about how Coruscant became the political center of the galaxy, but we didn't really dive into what that actually meant for the planet itself. And trust me, the transformation of this world is absolutely insane. Imagine you're standing on Coruscant back when the Republic was first forming. You'd see cities, sure, but also oceans, forests, mountains, normal planet stuff. Fast forward a few thousand years, and literally every single inch of the surface is covered in buildings. Not most of it, not 99% of it, every single inch. We're talking about a construction project that lasted millennia. Generation after generation, building upward and outward, until the original surface of the planet was buried under thousands of meters of metal, duracrete, and transparent steel. The oceans, drained and paved over, the mountains, flattened or built around, natural landscapes, they became legends that people only read about in old archives. This didn't happen overnight. This was thousands of years of constant construction, every generation adding another layer, building on top of what came before. The lower levels became the foundation for upper levels, which became the foundation for even higher levels. Coruscant grew vertically in a way that no other planet in the galaxy could match, and this created something really bizarre, a vertical class system that was literally built into the architecture. The higher you lived, the more power and wealth you had. The lower you lived, the more forgotten you became. Let's start at the top. The upper levels, the ones that actually see sunlight. That's where the real power lives. We're talking about the top kilometre or so of the city. This is where senators have their apartments, where corporate executives run their empires, where the truly wealthy spend their days, never having to think about what's happening below them. The air up there is clean, filtered and regulated. The buildings are architectural marvels, each one trying to outdo the others in grandeur and beauty. Landing platforms for personal ships, gardens maintained at enormous expense, restaurants where a single meal costs more than most families make in a year. The people up there live in a completely different world than everyone else. And right at the heart of it all sits the Senate building. Man, this thing is something else. It's a monument to power itself. The architects designed it to be overwhelming, to make anyone who enters feel small and insignificant compared to the might of the Republic. The main chamber is this massive rotunda with floating platforms for each senator. Thousands of them, all hovering in this artificial gravity well, able to fly out to the center to address the entire Senate. The design is meant to show equality. Every senator has the same platform, the same voice, the same power. Except that's complete nonsense, and everyone knows it. A senator from Coruscant or Alderaan walks into that chamber with way more influence than someone representing a farming world in the Outer Rim. The architecture claims democracy, but the reality is oligarchy dressed up in fancy robes. Diplomats from every member world maintain embassies and residences, cultural centers representing thousands of different civilizations. Coruscant becomes this melting pot where every species, every culture, every tradition has some kind of presence. It's diversity on a scale that's hard to comprehend. Even back then, even in these early days, the underworld existed. Because wherever you have concentrated wealth and power, you have crime. The lower levels of Coruscant, the places where sunlight never reaches, became home to a completely different society. These aren't the depths we see in the Clone Wars era. Not yet, but the foundations are being laid. Criminal organizations start to realize that Coruscant's endless construction creates perfect hiding spots. The maze of lower levels, old abandoned sections, maintenance tunnels, it's a smuggler's paradise. The Republic authorities tried to maintain order in the lower levels, but it was a losing battle from the start. The same vertical structure that created the class system made enforcement nearly impossible. Police and security forces focused on protecting the upper levels where the important people lived. Everything below? Good luck. This was all accepted as normal. The people in the upper levels didn't think about what was happening below them. Out of sight, out of mind. The lower level residents weren't invited to fancy parties or Senate meetings, so they might as well not exist. The symbolism of Coruscant's structure became the symbolism of the entire Republic. Height equals power. Its social stratification, made physical, impossible to ignore, and yet everyone just accepted it. What's really fascinating is how this one planet shaped galactic culture for 25,000 years. Coruscant style became the standard. Other core worlds started copying its architecture, its fashion, its customs. If you wanted to be taken seriously in galactic politics or business, you adopted Coruscanti manners and aesthetics. The language of diplomacy became the language of Coruscant. The fashion trends started on Coruscant. The art, the music, the literature that was considered civilized and proper, all of it came from this one world. It dominated culturally, and the planet kept growing. Every year, more construction. Every decade, another level added. Every century, more of the original world disappeared under the weight of civilization. The people living there didn't see it as destroying their planet. They saw it as progress, as evolution, as the natural order of things. You ever think about how insane the first hyperspace explorers must have been? Because seriously, these people were absolutely nuts in the best possible way. Imagine you're a pilot in the early days of the Republic. Someone hands you coordinates to a hyperspace route that's never been tested. You punch those numbers into your Navi computer, pull the lever, and hope you don't fly straight into a star or get ripped apart by a gravity well. That was the job. That was what these pioneers did every single day. The galaxy didn't come with a map, folks. Every single hyperspace route we take for granted, the ones that connect Coruscant to the Outer Rim, the trade lanes that made entire sectors wealthy, someone had to discover those. And discovery meant risk. Enormous, terrifying, deadly risk. Hyperspace travel is weird enough when you're following established routes. You're essentially punching through real space into another dimension where the laws of physics get really funky. Distance compresses, time gets relative, and if your calculations are off by even a fraction, you're dead. Now imagine doing that when nobody's ever successfully made the jump before. The early accidents were horrific. Ships that entered hyperspace and never came out. Explorers who miscalculated and dropped out of hyperspace inside a planet's gravity well, getting torn apart by tidal forces. Entire crews going mad from hyperspace exposure when their shielding failed. Colonial expeditions vanishing without a trace. Hundreds of people just gone. Their fate unknown forever. There's this one story from the early expansion era about a colony ship called the Resounding that tried to reach a promising world in what would later become the Colonies region. 3,000 colonists, all their supplies, all their hopes for a new life. They jumped into hyperspace and disappeared. 20 years later, another expedition found the Resounding drifting in deep space. Everyone on board was dead. The ship's logs showed they'd dropped out of hyperspace in the middle of nowhere. Their Navi computer fried. No way to calculate a new jump. They'd survived for months, rationing supplies, sending distress signals that nobody would ever hear. Eventually, they ran out of everything. And you know what the Republic did? They sent more ships on that route, because that's what it took to map the galaxy, accepting that people were going to die, and sending them anyway. But when a route worked, when an explorer successfully jumped to a new system and made it back to report their findings, that's when everything changed for that region of space. Because hyperspace routes determined everything. Which worlds got rich, which ones stayed poor, which ones even got noticed at all. The Perlemian trade route was one of the first major successes. This thing connected Coruscant to the northern core worlds and eventually extended all the way out to the Outer Rim. The explorers who mapped this route became legends. They opened up thousands of systems to trade and colonization practically overnight. Then you had the Corellian Run, mapped by, surprise, Corellian explorers who were absolutely fearless when it came to hyperspace navigation. This route connected the core to the southern galaxy and became one of the most profitable trade lanes in history. Worlds that sat along the Corellian Run became wealthy almost by accident. They didn't have to do anything special. They just had the good fortune of being in the right place when the route was established. And that's the thing nobody really talks about. Hyperspace routes created winners and losers based purely on geography. Your planet could have incredible resources, a brilliant population, amazing potential. But if you weren't near a major trade route, you were screwed. Nobody's coming to trade with you if it takes 3 weeks of dangerous jumps to reach your system. Worlds along the main routes got regular traffic, which meant merchants, which meant goods from across the galaxy, which meant their economies grew. They got Republic attention because senators and officials actually visited them. They got infrastructure investments because maintaining the trade routes was profitable. Meanwhile, Planets just a few parsecs off the main lanes might as well have been in another galaxy. No trade, no visitors, no investment. They were isolated by pure chance. The explorers happened to find a route that went around them instead of through them. First contact situations during this era were wildly unpredictable. Sometimes an explorer would drop into a new system and find a welcoming civilization eager to join the galactic community. Cultural exchanges, trade agreements, mutual benefits, all around. Beautiful stuff. So we need to talk about one of the most pivotal moments in galactic history, when a bunch of exiled Dark Jedi stumbled onto the Sith species and decided to play God. Because what happened next would haunt the galaxy for thousands of years. Around 6,900 BBY, these Dark Jedi, we're talking about fallen members of the Jedi Order who'd been experimenting with the dark side, got their butts kicked and were exiled from Republic space. The Jedi Order basically said, "You're too dangerous, get out, never come back." So these guys took their ships and jumped into the unknown regions of space, bitter and angry and looking for somewhere to rebuild, and they found the Sith species. Now, the Sith were a relatively primitive species, living on worlds like Korriban, Ziost, and later Dromund Kaas. They were naturally strong in the Force, particularly the dark side. Their culture already revolved around strength, domination, and ritualistic combat. They had Force-sensitive individuals, but they didn't have the knowledge or training that these Dark Jedi possessed. These exiles didn't arrive as refugees seeking shelter. They took one look at the Sith species and saw an opportunity. A Force-sensitive population that could be molded into an army, a culture that already valued the exact things the dark side teaches. The Dark Jedi declared themselves the rulers of the Sith. They positioned themselves as divine figures, as lords who commanded absolute obedience, and the Sith species, lacking any framework to understand what was really happening, accepted it. This is where it gets really dark. The Dark Jedi enslaved them, an entire species bound in servitude to beings who claimed divinity. The Sith were forced to build temples, fight wars, and dedicate their entire existence to serving their new masters. The first Sith Empire was built on the backs of this enslaved species. Korriban became the heart of it all, the Holy Land, the place where the Dark Lords established their seat of power. Other worlds like Ziost and eventually Dromund Kaas became administrative and military centers. But Korriban? Korriban was special. It's a desert world, harsh and unforgiving. The environment itself seemed designed to test anyone who lived there. Constant sandstorms, dangerous wildlife, scarce resources. Survival on Korriban meant being strong, being ruthless, being willing to do whatever it took. The Dark Jedi looked at this planet and saw perfection. A world that naturally embodied dark side philosophy. Survival of the fittest made literal. They decided this would be where they'd build their legacy. The Valley of the Dark Lords became the most important location on the entire planet. This massive canyon complex was transformed into a necropolis, a city of the dead where the most powerful Sith Lords would be entombed. But these weren't just graves, they were monuments to power, testaments to the achievements of those buried within. Each tomb was massive. We're talking about structures that took decades to build, designed specifically to intimidate and awe anyone who looked at them. Enormous statues of the entombed Sith Lord, towering over the approach. Massive doors inscribed with warnings and boasts. Architecture meant to make you feel small and insignificant. And the tombs weren't empty monuments. They were filled with traps, puzzles, and challenges, because the Sith philosophy demanded that even in death, a Dark Lord should test those who came after. Sith acolytes were sent into these tombs as trials. Prove your worth by surviving the legacy of those who came before you. The traps were lethal. Pressure plates that triggered blade mechanisms, rooms that filled with poison gas, floors that collapsed into pits filled with creatures that had been starved for years. The tombs killed more acolytes than they trained, and that was by design. Weakness had no place in the Sith Empire. The philosophy that developed in this empire was pretty straightforward. Strength through passion, power through domination. The Jedi taught detachment, serenity, peace. The Sith Empire taught the opposite. Embrace your emotions, especially the strong ones. Use your anger, your hatred, your fear. Let them make you powerful. This created a society that was incredibly powerful, but fundamentally unstable. The Sith could gather massive armies, command incredible force abilities, and conquer entire sectors of space, but they were always on the verge of tearing themselves apart from within. Korriban stood at the center of all this chaos as a constant reminder of what the Sith valued: power, legacy, domination. The tombs in the Valley of the Dark Lords got more elaborate with each generation, as new Sith Lords tried to outdo their predecessors. The competition for glory extended even into death. The irony is that the Dark Jedi who started all this, the exiles who stumbled onto the Sith species and declared themselves gods, they became exactly what the Jedi Order feared they would. They'd proven the Jedi right about the dark side's corrupting influence, but they'd done it in a way that was way worse than anyone imagined. The Jedi feared they'd become dangerous individuals. Instead, they became the foundation of an empire that would threaten the galaxy for thousands of years. For over 1,000 years, the Sith Empire existed in complete isolation from the Republic. Two civilizations, both descended from the same galaxy, growing in completely opposite directions, with no idea the other existed. The Republic was expanding, sure, but they were moving in different directions. The Sith were building their empire in the far reaches of space, perfectly content to dominate their corner of the galaxy. It's approximately 5,000 BBY, and Naga Sadow decided that wasn't enough. Naga Sadow was one of those Sith Lords who combined ambition with actual strategic thinking. A dangerous combination. He looked at the Sith Empire and saw stagnation. They'd conquered their local systems, enslaved the Sith species, built their tombs and temples. But then what? Just sit around on Korriban arguing about who's the most powerful? That wasn't enough for Sadow. He had this vision of the Sith expanding across the entire galaxy, and when he learned about the Republic, this massive government full of wealthy worlds that had exiled the Sith's ancestors centuries ago, he saw the perfect target. Revenge and conquest wrapped into one beautiful package. But Sadow was smart about it. He knew the Sith Empire couldn't just charge into Republic space blindly. He needed intelligence, he needed a plan, and he needed the other Sith Lords to back him. So he orchestrated this whole situation involving Republic explorers stumbling into Sith space, used it to consolidate his power, and then launched his invasion. The Republic had absolutely no idea what was coming. Think about their perspective for a second. They'd been expanding peacefully for thousands of years. Sure, there were occasional conflicts with new civilizations, but nothing they couldn't handle. The Jedi were legends, the military was, well, it barely existed because they hadn't needed one. Life was good in the core worlds. Then the Sith fleet dropped out of hyperspace. The initial attacks were devastating. Sadow hit border worlds first, places that had minimal defenses, populations that had never experienced real warfare. His strategy was psychological as much as military. He wanted to create terror, to make the Republic understand they were facing something completely beyond their experience. And it worked. Worlds burned, entire populations were wiped out or enslaved. The Sith used alchemy and dark side sorcery to create weapons the Republic had no defense against. Creatures mutated into monsters, illusions that drove defenders mad, force powers that could destroy ships from the inside out. The news spread through the Republic like a virus. At first, nobody believed it. Sith Lords? An empire built on the dark side? It sounded like a myth, like something from a children's scary story. But then the refugees started arriving, and the stories they told were too consistent, too detailed to be lies. Coruscant went into full panic mode. The Senate had emergency sessions that lasted for days. Representatives were screaming at each other, trying to figure out what to do. Some wanted to negotiate. Surely this could be resolved diplomatically. Others wanted to mobilize everything they had and strike back immediately. The problem was they didn't have much to mobilize. The Republic had spent 1,000 years building a government, not a military. They had local defense forces on individual planets, sure, but nothing resembling a unified military command. No battle fleets, no strategic reserves, no generals with actual combat experience. The Jedi stepped up because somebody had to. They'd been peacekeepers and diplomats for centuries, but their training included combat for situations exactly like this. Jedi Masters took command of whatever forces the Republic could scrape together and headed out to stop the Sith advance. The battles were brutal. Jedi who'd spent their lives mediating disputes and studying philosophy suddenly found themselves in life-or-death combat against Sith Lords who'd been training for war their entire lives. A lot of Jedi died in those first engagements. The dark side users they faced weren't like criminals or pirates. They were trained warriors with decades of experience using the Force as a weapon. But here's what Sado didn't account for. The Republic was massive. He could burn a dozen worlds, and it barely made a dent in their overall strength. The core worlds alone had populations in the trillions, industrial capacity that dwarfed anything the Sith Empire possessed, and once they got organized, resources that seemed endless. The war started turning when the Republic finally mobilized its economy for war production. Shipyards that had been building civilian transports switched to warships. Factories started producing weapons and armor. Millions of beings volunteered or were conscripted into defense forces. Sado's fleet started running into resistance that actually hurt. Republic ships might not have been designed for combat, but there were thousands of them. Then Sado made his big play, attacking Coruscant itself. If he could take the capital, he could decapitate the entire Republic government. The psychological impact alone might cause member worlds to surrender rather than face the same fate. The Battle of Coruscant was chaos. Sith warships in orbit, dropships landing warriors, and war beasts directly into the city. The Senate building came under direct attack. Civilians who'd never seen combat were suddenly running for their lives through streets filled with Sith soldiers. The Jedi threw everything they had into defending Coruscant. Every available Jedi in the Corps rushed to the capital. The fighting raged across the upper levels, lightsabers clashing, force powers tearing through buildings, fires breaking out across entire districts. Citizens watched from their windows as their world became a battlefield. The illusion of safety, the belief that Coruscant was untouchable because it was the center of galactic civilization. All of that shattered in a single day. People who'd spent their whole lives in comfort and security suddenly understood what the border worlds had been experiencing. The Senate kept trying to function even as the battle raged outside. Representatives were drafting emergency powers, trying to coordinate the defense, arguing about whether to evacuate. Some wanted to flee to safer core worlds. Others insisted that abandoning Coruscant would mean the end of the Republic. The battle turned when Jedi reinforcements arrived and managed to break the Sith ground assault. Without their troops on the surface, Sado's fleet couldn't hold orbit against the Republic ships that kept arriving from every direction. He was forced to retreat before his entire invasion force was destroyed. The Republic forces pursued. They weren't content to just drive the Sith away. They wanted to end this threat permanently. The Jedi led fleets deep into Sith space, fighting battle after battle as they pushed toward Korriban itself. Sado's empire started crumbling. Other Sith Lords turned on him, blaming him for the disaster. His forces were stretched thin, his resources depleted. The grand invasion that was supposed to conquer the Republic had become a desperate fight for survival. The final battles in Sith space were savage. The Republic was fighting to make sure this could never happen again. Sith worlds were bombarded, temples destroyed, fleets scattered. It was total war, the kind the Republic had never waged before. Sado himself escaped, but his empire was finished. The Sith were scattered, their infrastructure destroyed, their dreams of galactic conquest dead. The Republic claimed victory and went home, believing they'd eliminated the Sith threat forever. But what changed? The Republic's entire worldview. Before the Great Hyperspace War, they believed in peaceful expansion, diplomatic solutions, minimal military force. They thought civilization meant you didn't need armies. The Sith taught them differently. They learned that there were threats out there that couldn't be negotiated with. Enemies who wanted nothing but destruction. Forces that would exploit any weakness. The core worlds learned they weren't safe just because they were powerful and centralized. After the Great Hyperspace War ended, the Republic entered what historians call the Golden Age. And on paper, it really was golden. We're talking about roughly 1,000 years, from about 5,000 BBY to 4,000 BBY, where the Republic experienced unprecedented expansion, economic growth, and relative peace. Relative being the key word there. Thousands of new worlds joined the Republic during this period. Explorers were still mapping hyperspace routes, corporations were establishing colonies, and the dream of a truly galactic civilization seemed within reach. Every year brought news of another sector incorporated, another species joining the galactic community, another success story for Republic democracy. The economy was booming, trade between worlds reached levels that would have seemed impossible just centuries earlier. Goods from one side of the galaxy could reach the other in weeks instead of months. Entire planets specialized in specific industries, knowing they could export to markets across thousands of systems. Cultural exchange flourished too. Art, music, philosophy, technology, ideas flowed as freely as goods. A scientific breakthrough on Alderaan would spread to research institutions across the galaxy within days. An artistic movement on Corellia would inspire creators on hundreds of worlds. This was the Republic at its best, doing what it was designed to do, connecting civilizations, facilitating cooperation, making the galaxy smaller and more unified. The Senate was growing, massively. When the Republic started, you had a few dozen core worlds with senators. That was manageable. You could have actual debates, real discussions, make decisions in a reasonable time frame. But as thousands of new worlds joined, each wanting representation, the Senate became enormous. By the height of the Golden Age, there were thousands of senators. The Senate chamber, that had seemed so grand, now felt cramped. Sessions that used to last hours now dragged on for days. Simple legislation that should have taken a week to pass got bogged down in committees and subcommittees for months. Democracy was drowning in its own success. Too many voices meant nobody's voice could be heard clearly. Every issue became a negotiation between hundreds of different interests, each senator trying to secure benefits for their homeworld before supporting anything. And this is where the corruption really started taking root, because when you have thousands of senators and the system moves slower than a hut on sedatives, some people figure out how to game it. Corporate interests realize something crucial. Senators need campaign funding. They need support to get elected and stay in office. And corporations had credits, lots and lots of credits. The Churka Corporation led the way on this. They'd already been exploiting frontier worlds for centuries, but now they got smart about it. Instead of just buying resources cheap and selling them expensive, they started buying senators. Not literally, that would be illegal, but through campaign contributions, lobbying, strategic partnerships with influential families. A senator from some mid-rim agricultural world gets approached by Churka representatives. They offer to build processing facilities on his planet, create jobs, boost the local economy. In exchange, he just needs to support certain legislation. Mining rights on uninhabited worlds, reduced tariffs on corporate shipping, relaxed environmental regulations. It seems reasonable, right? His world benefits. The corporation benefits. Everybody wins. Except the legislation he's supporting affects the entire galaxy, and he's voting based on what's good for Churka, not what's good for the Republic. Multiply that by hundreds of senators and dozens of corporations, and you start seeing the problem. The Senate wasn't legislating for the common good anymore. It was a marketplace where corporate interests bought the votes they needed. The really insidious part was how normalized it all became. Nobody called it corruption because, technically, it wasn't. There were no laws against corporations funding senators' campaigns or offering economic incentives to their homeworlds. It was just business, just politics, just the way things worked. Some corporations became so powerful, they were essentially quasi-governments. So we've talked about the Republic's golden age and how it was rotting from within, but now we need to jump into something way more sinister. What happens when a dead Sith Lord refuses to stay dead and starts manipulating an entire planet from beyond the grave? Alderaan was this fascinating world in the Inner Rim with a really unique setup. The planet itself was covered in dense jungle filled with absolutely vicious creatures. We're talking predators that could tear through durasteel, flying beasts the size of starfighters, stuff that made survival on the surface basically impossible for normal colonists. So the original human settlers did what made sense. They built a massive walled city called Iziz. Huge walls, defensive systems, everything designed to keep the jungle horrors outside where they belonged. Inside Iziz you had civilization, technology, safety. Outside, death waiting in the trees. But not everyone stayed in the city. Some colonists, either exiled or choosing to leave, went out into the wilderness, and instead of dying like everyone expected, they survived by taming the beasts. They became beast riders, living in the jungle, riding the same creatures that were supposed to kill them. This created a weird divide. The city dwellers in Iziz saw themselves as civilized, proper, the inheritors of galactic culture. The beast riders were primitives, savages, rejects. Meanwhile, the beast riders saw the city folk as weak, disconnected from nature, hiding behind walls instead of facing challenges head-on. Neither side was completely wrong, which made the tension worse. This went on for generations, two completely different cultures on the same planet, each despising the other. Then Freed and Nad showed up and made everything exponentially worse. Freed and Nad was a fallen Jedi who'd gone full dark side centuries before this conflict. He'd travelled to the Sith worlds, learned from the tombs on Korriban, became incredibly powerful in the dark side, and eventually died on Onderon. But death didn't stop him. His spirit lingered, bound to his tomb through sheer force of will and dark side energy. And from that tomb, he started manipulating Onderon's politics like a puppet master, pulling strings from the shadows. Nad had this long-term plan. He couldn't directly return to life, but he could influence the living. He whispered to Onderon's rulers, guided their decisions, pushed them toward conflict. The royal family started dabbling in dark side practices without fully understanding what they were doing. They thought they were just using ancient knowledge to strengthen their rule. The Beast Riders, ironically, were being helped by Jedi who'd come to investigate the dark side presence on the planet. The city, supposedly the civilized side, was being corrupted by a dead Sith Lord's manipulation. Jeth, a Jedi Master, arrived with his students to try and resolve the situation. One of those students was Ulic Keldroma. Remember that name? It becomes really important. The Jedi quickly realized this wasn't just a political dispute. The dark side energy emanating from Nad's tomb was infecting the entire planet. People who'd never shown Force sensitivity were having visions, experiencing rage and paranoia, making decisions that made no sense except through the lens of dark side corruption. Arca and his students tried to purify the tomb, to sever Nad's connection to the physical world. They performed Jedi rituals, used light side techniques, genuinely believed they could end the threat. Nad had been dead for centuries. He could wait a little longer. He let the Jedi think they'd won, let them believe they'd cleansed Onderon of his influence. Meanwhile, his real plan was already in motion, somewhere else entirely. On the Empress Teta system, a group of aristocrats had discovered Sith artifacts and started experimenting with dark side techniques. They called themselves the Krath, and they thought they were just exploring forbidden knowledge, pushing boundaries, being edgy nobles with too much time and money. What they actually became was a dark side cult with significant military resources. These weren't trained Sith Lords. They were amateurs, playing with powers they didn't understand, but they had wealth, ships, soldiers, and just enough dark side knowledge to be dangerous. The Krath started conquering nearby systems, spreading their influence, recruiting more followers. The Republic noticed, but didn't take it too seriously at first. Some cult causing trouble in a remote sector? The Jedi would handle it. Then Exar Kun entered the picture, and everything went sideways. Exar Kun was a Jedi student, brilliant and powerful, but arrogant in the way that gifted people often are. He believed he could study the dark side without being corrupted by it, that he was strong enough to resist its influence while learning its secrets. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. Kun travelled to Sith worlds against the Jedi Council's orders. He explored the tombs on Korriban, studied ancient texts, pushed deeper and deeper into dark side knowledge. And with each step he convinced himself he was still in control, that he was just learning, that he could stop any time. On Yavin 4 he found a Sith temple and the spirit of an ancient Dark Lord waiting for him. The spirit didn't force Kun to fall, it just showed him possibilities, offered him power, told him he could accomplish great things if he embraced his full potential. Kun fell hard, not gradually, but in a moment of choice when he decided that power was more important than the Jedi teachings. He embraced the dark side completely and transformed from a promising Jedi into something far more dangerous. He travelled to the Empress Teta system and took control of the Krath. The aristocrats who thought they were masters of the dark side met an actual Sith Lord and realized they were children playing pretend. Kun became their leader within days. Then he did something that hadn't been done in centuries. He started recruiting Jedi students directly. Think about how bold that is. Kun went to Jedi academies and temples, found students who were struggling or disillusioned or ambitious, and showed them an alternative path. He didn't kidnap them or force them. He seduced them with promises of greater power, freedom from restrictive rules, the ability to use their full potential. And it worked. Dozens of Jedi students abandoned the Order and joined Kun. Each one brought their training, their knowledge, their connections. Kun was building an army of dark side users who knew Jedi techniques inside and out. The Jedi Order was horrified. This wasn't an external threat they could fight. This was their own students turning against them. Masters watched apprentices they'd trained for years walk away to join Kun's empire. Then Ulic Qel-Droma showed up, and things got even worse. He'd been traumatized by what he'd seen there, by how close he'd come to the dark side himself. He decided the best way to fight the Krath was to infiltrate them, pretend to join, destroy them from within. Classic undercover operation, right? Except you can't pretend to embrace the dark side without actually embracing it. Ulic fell. He genuinely believed he could control his descent, that he was just playing a role. By the time he realized he'd actually fallen, it was too late to go back. Kun and Ulic met and recognized each other as equals. Two fallen Jedi, both powerful, both commanding significant forces. Instead of fighting for dominance like traditional Sith, they formed an alliance. Kun declared himself Dark Lord of the Sith, and Ulic became his apprentice, but more like a partner than a subordinate. Together, they were unstoppable. Kun had the mystical knowledge and force abilities. Ulic had tactical genius and military experience. The Krath provided resources and manpower. They started manufacturing weapons of war on a scale the galaxy hadn't seen since the Great Hyperspace War. But Kun's real strategy was more insidious than just building an army. He targeted Jedi academies specifically, not to destroy them, to convert them. He wanted to prove that the dark side was superior by turning the Jedi's own students against them. Strike teams of fallen Jedi would attack temples not to kill the masters, but to steal Sith artifacts the Jedi had collected. Each raid brought more dark side knowledge into Kun's hands and demoralized the Jedi further. Kun also went after Sith artifacts scattered across the galaxy. Ancient holocrons, weapons, texts, anything that contained dark side teachings. He was systematically gathering the accumulated knowledge of millennia of Sith Lords. On Yavin 4, he enslaved the Massassi species, descendants of Sith corrupted warriors, and forced them to build massive temples. They were focusing arrays for dark side energy, designed to amplify Kun's power to unprecedented levels. He raised and corrupted dark side beasts, creating monsters that could be unleashed against Republic worlds. Some of these creatures were alchemically enhanced to resist lightsabers, to hunt Jedi specifically, to spread fear wherever they appeared. The galaxy watched in horror as Jedi turned on each other. Citizens who trusted Jedi as peacekeepers suddenly didn't know which ones were still loyal to the light. The psychological damage was immense. If you couldn't trust Jedi, who could you trust? The Republic tried to respond militarily, but how do you fight Force users who can see your strategies before you implement them, who can turn your own soldiers against you with mind tricks, who can sabotage your ships through the Force? Kun and Ulic were demonstrating that the dark side could do everything the light side could do, but faster and more effectively. They were making the Jedi look weak, outdated, bound by rules that limited their effectiveness. The tragic part about Ulic was that somewhere deep down, he still believed he was a good person. He'd fallen so gradually that he couldn't see how far he'd gone. When he looked in the mirror, he still saw a Jedi who was doing what needed to be done, making hard choices for the greater good. Kun had no such illusions. He knew exactly what he was and reveled in it. He'd embraced the dark side completely and was using it to reshape the galaxy according to his vision. The speed of their rise was terrifying. Within months, they'd gone from individual fallen Jedi to commanding an empire that rivaled the Republic's military strength. They had fleets, armies, Sith acolytes, dark side beasts, super weapons, and a network of spies and corrupted officials throughout Republic space. The Jedi Council realized too late that they'd been fighting the wrong battle. They'd been trying to redeem individual fallen students when they should have been preparing for war. By the time they mobilized the Order's full strength, Kun and Ulic had already established themselves as an existential threat. This was the Great Sith War beginning. It was betrayal on a galactic scale, and it would leave scars that lasted for generations. Entire star systems were gone, planets reduced to slag, populations wiped out, ecosystems destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. The casualty numbers were so staggering that the Republic stopped counting after the first billion. It was too demoralizing, too incomprehensible. Ossus was the worst loss. This planet housed the greatest library in the known galaxy, thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, scientific research, historical records, philosophical texts, art, culture, everything that made galactic civilization worth preserving. The Jedi had protected it for millennia, then it burned. Sith forces triggered a cataclysm that consumed the entire world. Jedi died trying to save whatever they could, loading ancient texts onto ships while fire rained from the sky. Most of the knowledge was lost forever, discoveries that took centuries to achieve, gone in hours. Jedi, the people who were supposed to protect the galaxy, had become the primary threat. Citizens watched Jedi they'd known for years, Jedi who'd helped their communities, suddenly turn into monsters wielding dark side powers. How do you process that? How do you trust anyone when the most trustworthy people in the galaxy proved they could be corrupted? Parents stopped sending Force-sensitive children to Jedi temples. Worlds banned Jedi from landing on their planets. The Order that had been respected for thousands of years became viewed with suspicion and fear. After the war ended, after Kun was defeated and Ulic redeemed himself through sacrifice, the Senate had to address the Jedi question. Emergency sessions were called specifically to debate the Order's future role in the Republic. The arguments got brutal. Senators from worlds devastated by fallen Jedi demanded the Order be disbanded entirely. "They created this mess," one senator famously said. "They recruited these students, trained them in powers no being should possess, then lost control of them. Why should they be our guardians?" Other senators argued the Jedi were still necessary, that without them, the Sith would have won. But even defenders of the Order admitted changes were needed. The Jedi had too much autonomy, too much unchecked power, too little accountability. New legislation passed restricting Jedi authority in Republic space. They couldn't deploy military forces without Senate approval. Their investigations required warrants from local governments. Their temples had to submit to inspections. The restrictions weren't overtly hostile, but the message was clear: we don't trust you anymore. The Senate never fully forgave the Jedi for the Great Sith War, and the Jedi never fully forgave themselves. While the Republic was still licking its wounds from the Great Sith War, a completely different kind of threat was emerging on the galaxy's edge. And this one didn't come from fallen Jedi or ancient Sith lords. It came from warriors who believed that combat itself was the highest form of existence: the Mandalorians. Originally, they were just one species on one planet, Mandalore. But what made them unique was their philosophy about strength, honor, and what it meant to live a worthy life. Mandalore the First, the guy who really defined what being Mandalorian meant, had this vision. He looked at the galaxy and saw civilizations growing soft, hiding behind technology and bureaucracy, forgetting that survival required strength. He believed that only through constant testing, constant combat, could people reach their true potential. So he started uniting the clans on Mandalore under a single principle: combat is life, weakness is death. Not as some metaphor or philosophical exercise, as literal truth. If you couldn't fight, you had no value. If you couldn't defend yourself and your clan, you deserved whatever happened to you. This sounds brutal, and it was, but it also created incredible unity. The clans that had been fighting each other for generations suddenly had a common identity, a shared purpose. They were Mandalorians, and being Mandalorian meant something specific. You were a warrior. You followed the code. You proved yourself through combat. The Rezol Nare, the 6 actions, became the foundation of their entire culture. Wear the armor, speak the language, defend yourself and your family. Raise your children as Mandalorians. Contribute to the clan, rally to the Mandalore when called. Simple rules, but they created an incredibly cohesive society. Mandalore I led crusades across the Outer Rim, challenging any civilization that seemed strong enough to provide a real fight. Worlds that surrendered immediately were left alone. There was no honor in crushing the weak. But worlds that fought back, those became legendary battles that Mandalorians would sing about for generations. The philosophy driving this was genuinely alien to most galactic civilizations. The Republic fought wars to protect territory or enforce laws. Corporations fought for profit. The Sith fought for power and domination. But the Mandalorians fought because combat itself had value, because testing yourself against a worthy enemy made you stronger, better, more alive. Then the Mandalorian Wars properly began, and everything escalated to a level the galaxy hadn't seen in centuries. The catalyst was complicated. Some sources say the Sith manipulated the Mandalorians into attacking. Others suggest it was purely Mandalorian initiative. Either way, around 3976 BBY, Mandalore the Ultimate launched a full-scale invasion of Republic space. The Outer Rim worlds were hit first. Planets that had been struggling under Republic neglect suddenly faced armies of professional warriors who'd been training for this their entire lives. The slaughter was immediate and horrific. Cathar became the symbol of Mandalorian brutality. This was a world inhabited by a feline species known for their honor and combat prowess. Exactly the kind of opponent Mandalorians respected. They committed genocide. Millions of Cathar were killed, their cities burned, their culture nearly erased. The Mandalorians justified it by saying the Cathar had proven themselves unworthy through some perceived dishonor in combat, but the reality was mass murder on a scale that shocked even hardened warriors. News of Cathar reached the core worlds, and the Senate's response was pathetic. Emergency sessions, debates, fact-finding committees, the usual bureaucratic nonsense. Meanwhile, world after world in the Outer Rim sent distress signals that went unanswered. The Republic's reasoning was cold and calculated. Those Outer Rim worlds weren't economically important. They didn't have significant representation in the Senate. Defending them would require mobilizing forces that the Republic didn't really have, spending money that core senators didn't want to spend. Those worlds aren't important enough, became the unofficial policy. Not stated publicly, of course, but reflected in every decision the Senate made. They'd debate aid packages while planets burned, form committees to study the Mandalorian threat while millions died. The Jedi Council's response was equally frustrating. They saw the Mandalorian advance. They knew people were suffering, but they counseled patience. Wait and see if diplomacy works. Don't rush into another war so soon after the Great Sith War. Trust in the Force to reveal the right path. But two Jedi, Revan and Malak, looked at this situation and said no. They watched the Outer Rim bleed while the Council meditated and the Senate debated, and they decided that action mattered more than following orders. Revan was brilliant and charismatic. He gathered Jedi who felt the same way, that their duty to protect the innocent outweighed their duty to obey the Council. Dozens, then hundreds of Jedi followed him, defying the Council openly. To the Outer Rim, these Jedi were heroes. Finally, someone with power was actually helping them. Revan's forces started winning battles, pushing the Mandalorians back, giving hope to worlds that had been abandoned by the Republic. To the core worlds, Revan was a problem. Another Jedi defying authority, another potential Exar Kun situation. The Senate didn't know whether to support him or condemn him, so they did nothing and hoped the situation resolved itself. The war dragged on for years. The Mandalorians were incredibly effective warriors, but they were facing an enemy who matched their tactical brilliance and had force powers to boot, winning battles through strategy as much as strength. But the Mandalorians adapted. They started developing tactics specifically to counter Jedi. Weapons that disrupted force powers, formations that minimized lightsaber effectiveness, psychological warfare to break Jedi concentration. The battles became increasingly brutal. Neither side took many prisoners. Wounded warriors were often left to die because neither side had the resources for medical care at this scale. Entire fleets were destroyed in engagements that lasted days, And the core worlds only started paying attention when the Mandalorians pushed close enough to threaten mid-rim systems with actual economic value. Suddenly the Senate found money for military spending. Suddenly defending against the Mandalorians became a priority. The hypocrisy was staggering. Outer Rim worlds that had been screaming for help for years watched core senators act shocked and outraged that the Mandalorians dared attack civilized space. The same Senate that had written off millions of Outer Rim deaths as acceptable losses now demanded immediate action to protect core interests. Revan saw all of this and understood exactly what it meant. The Republic didn't care about its citizens equally. It cared about wealth and power, and anyone who didn't have either was expendable. This realization would shape everything Revan did later, but in the moment, he focused on winning the war, and winning meant making a choice that would haunt everyone involved. Malachor 5 was a Mandalorian stronghold, heavily fortified and strategically critical. Taking it conventionally would cost thousands of lives and might not even succeed. The Mandalorians were dug in, prepared for a siege, willing to fight to the last warrior. Revan had a super weapon, the Mass Shadow Generator, a device that could manipulate gravity on a planetary scale, literally tearing a world apart. Using it meant sacrificing thousands of Republic soldiers and Jedi who were fighting on the surface, along with the entire Mandalorian force. The math was brutal. Sacrifice thousands to save millions. End the war immediately versus watching it drag on for years, with mounting casualties. No good options, just terrible ones and worse ones. Revan gave the order. The Mass Shadow Generator activated. Imagine being on Malachor 5 when it happened. You're fighting, trying to survive the next few seconds of combat, and suddenly gravity goes insane. The planet starts ripping itself apart. Ships get pulled from orbit and crushed. The surface cracks open, revealing the molten core beneath. Mandalorians, Republic soldiers, Jedi, everyone died together. No time to escape, no chance to surrender, just instant annihilation. The screams in the Force were so intense that Jedi across the galaxy felt it. This massive wound where thousands of Force-sensitive beings died in terror and agony. Malachor 5 became a wound in the Force itself, a scar on reality where the normal rules of the Force didn't apply anymore. Dark side energy concentrated there so intensely that the planet's shattered remains became toxic to all life. The Jedi who survived and witnessed what happened were traumatized in ways that never healed. They'd watched their friends die, felt their deaths through the Force, knew that victory had been purchased with mass murder. Some went mad, others cut themselves off from the Force entirely, unable to bear the connection to that much death. Mitra Surik, the Jedi exile, was there when it happened. She'd been instrumental in the battle, and the guilt of all those deaths hit her so hard she severed her own connection to the Force, just cut herself off completely because the alternative was drowning in the suffering she'd helped cause. But tactically, it worked. The Mandalorians lost their stronghold and a huge portion of their forces in a single instant. Their momentum broke. The war suddenly became winnable for the Republic. Revan pressed the advantage ruthlessly. He pursued the scattered Mandalorian forces, winning battle after battle, pushing them back toward their home territories. The Mandalorians who'd seemed unstoppable were now in full retreat. The final confrontation came when Revan challenged Mandalore the Ultimate to single combat. This was playing by Mandalorian rules. Let the leaders fight, let their combat determine the outcome. Mandalore couldn't refuse without losing all credibility with his own people. They fought, and Revan won. Not easily. Mandalore the Ultimate was one of the greatest warriors in Mandalorian history. But Revan had the Force, superior strategy, and the weight of necessity driving him. He killed Mandalore and took his mask. The mask was everything to the Mandalorians. Without it, there was no Mandalore. Without the Mandalore, there was no one to rally to, no central authority to follow. The sixth tenet of the Rezolnare became impossible to fulfill. The Republic's mercy was calculated cruelty. They disarmed the Mandalorians, forbade them from gathering in large groups, occupied Mandalorian worlds to ensure compliance. They systematically dismantled everything that made Mandalorian culture work. A proud warrior culture was reduced to mercenaries and bounty hunters. Mandalorians who'd fought for glory and honor were now fighting for credits, taking whatever jobs they could get to survive. The armor became a costume instead of a sacred symbol. The language persisted, but the culture it represented was shattered. Some Mandalorians became bodyguards for Hutt crime lords. Others hired out as enforcers for corporations. A few became bounty hunters, at least maintaining some semblance of the warrior tradition. But all of them carried the knowledge that they'd been defeated, broken, reduced to this. The Republic thought they'd solved the Mandalorian problem. They'd neutralized a major military threat and prevented future wars. Mission accomplished, right? After defeating the Mandalorians, Revan disappeared into the unknown regions with Malak and a small fleet. The Republic assumed he was chasing down Mandalorian remnants or exploring new threats. They had no idea what he was actually doing out there. Revan had discovered something terrifying: the true Sith Empire, hidden beyond known space, building strength for over 1,000 years. And at its heart, an immortal Sith Emperor so powerful he made every dark side user Revan had studied look like children playing with matches. Most people would have run back to warn the Republic, but Revan had seen the Republic's true nature during the Mandalorian Wars. The corruption, the selfishness, the complete inability to act decisively. He knew they couldn't face what was coming. They'd debate while the Sith Emperor's forces destroyed them. So Revan made a choice that would define him forever. He decided the only way to save the Republic was to conquer it first, to forge it into something strong enough to survive what was coming. He would become the enemy to prepare them for a worse enemy. In the unknown regions, he found the Starforge, an ancient Rakatan space station that could manufacture ships and weapons using the dark side of the Force. Unlimited production, powered by dark side energy, capable of creating fleets that dwarfed anything the Republic possessed. This thing was reality-breaking. You'd feed it raw materials and dark side energy, and it would spit out fully functional warships. No shipyards, no years of construction, no massive workforce, just endless production, limited only by how much dark side power you could channel into it. Revan claimed it and started building. Within months, he had a fleet. Within a year, an armada. Ships kept pouring out of the Starforge, crewed by soldiers he'd recruited or conscripted, commanded by officers loyal to his vision. But Revan differed from every Sith Lord before him. He targeted infrastructure, not populations. He'd conquer a world's government, replace the leadership, leave everything else functioning. The factories kept producing. The people kept working. The economy kept running. His goal was to strengthen the Republic by force, to create a government capable of unified action instead of endless debate. He'd remove the corrupt senators, streamline the bureaucracy, build an actual military, prepare the galaxy for the true Sith threat. At least that's what he told himself. The reality was more complicated. Using the Starforge required dark side energy, and channeling that much darkness was changing him. The Revan who'd fought to save the Outer Rim was slowly being consumed by the Revan who believed only absolute power could save the galaxy. When his fleet emerged from the unknown regions and attacked Republic space, the shock was total. This wasn't some external enemy. This was Revan, the hero who'd defeated the Mandalorians, now leading a Sith armada against the government he'd sworn to protect. The Republic was completely unprepared. They demobilized after the Mandalorian Wars, assuming peace had returned. Their military was scattered, their defenses minimal, their leadership still the same ineffective Senate that had failed during every previous crisis. Revan's forces swept through system after system. His tactics were brilliant. Strike fast, overwhelm defenses, offer generous surrender terms. Worlds that capitulated kept their autonomy and resources. Only those that resisted faced real consequences, and even then, Revan focused on military targets. But to the average Republic citizen, this distinction didn't matter much. They were being conquered, their government overthrown, their way of life upended. The fact that Revan wasn't massacring populations was small comfort when Sith warships hung over your homeworld. The Senate descended into absolute chaos. Sessions became panic rooms where representatives screamed at each other, trying to assign blame while their government crumbled around them. Some senators fled to safer core worlds. Others tried to negotiate with Revan privately, offering to switch sides if he'd spare their homeworlds. The Supreme Chancellor was powerless. Every order he gave got countermanded by senators, protecting their own interests. Military leadership kept changing as commanders were replaced for political reasons rather than competence. The Republic was dying from institutional paralysis, while enemy fleets conquered planet after planet. Core worlds started fortifying their systems, pulling back defenses to protect themselves. The mid-rim was abandoned to fend for itself. The outer rim, which had already been neglected for millennia, was written off completely. The Republic's true priorities became crystal clear when survival was on the line. The economy collapsed harder than during the Great Sith War. Trade stopped because hyperspace lanes became battlefields. Credits became worthless because nobody knew which governments would survive to honor their currency. Banks failed, taking people's life savings with them. The psychological impact was devastating. The Republic had stood for 20,000 years. It was supposed to be eternal, unshakable, the foundation of galactic civilization. Watching it collapse this quickly, within months of Revan's invasion, shattered people's fundamental assumptions about stability and order. Then Malak betrayed Revan, and everything got exponentially worse. The details are murky. Some say Malak was manipulated, others that he acted from pure ambition. Either way, during a Jedi strike team's attack on Revan's flagship, Malak ordered his ships to fire on Revan's position, trying to kill both Revan and the Jedi in one shot. Revan survived, but was captured by the Jedi, his mind damaged and eventually reprogrammed. Malak seized control of the Sith Empire and the Starforge, and unlike Revan, Malak had no grand strategy, no vision of a stronger republic. Malak just wanted power, and he'd burn the galaxy to ash to keep it. Where Revan had been calculated and strategic, Malak was brutal and direct. He didn't bother with targeted strikes or generous surrender terms. Entire planets that refused to submit immediately got bombarded from orbit. Populations that resisted faced extermination. Taris became the symbol of Malak's reign, a thriving ecumenopolis with billions of inhabitants, stratified into upper and lower cities like Coruscant. Malak's forces were searching for a Jedi there, and when the search took too long, he just destroyed the entire planet. Billions dead in hours, civilians going about their lives, suddenly vaporized because their planet was inconvenient to Malak's plans. The bombardment was so thorough that the surface became uninhabitable, the cities reduced to radioactive ruins. Malak ruled through terror in its purest form. Former Sith worlds that had accepted Revan's rule rebelled against Malak. They tolerated conquest when it came with order and relative safety, but Malak's brutality was too much. Better to fight and maybe die than definitely die under his rule. This created a weird situation where the Sith Empire was fighting itself. Malak's loyalists versus worlds that wanted Revan back versus planets trying to return to the Republic. Three-way civil wars erupted across conquered space. The Republic tried to capitalize on this chaos, but they were barely holding together themselves. What little military they'd managed to assemble was stretched impossibly thin. Every victory cost resources they couldn't replace, ships they couldn't rebuild, soldiers they couldn't recruit fast enough. The Jedi were caught in an impossible position. They'd captured and reprogrammed Revan, giving him false memories and a new identity. Some Jedi thought this was necessary pragmatism. Others saw it as a horrific violation that made them no better than the Sith. When the truth about what they'd done to Revan eventually came out, it would damage the Order's reputation even further. But in the moment, they were too desperate to care about future consequences. The war dragged on, grinding both sides down. Malak kept producing ships from the Starforge, but he was losing troops faster than he could recruit replacements. The Republic kept losing territory, but their core systems were finally organizing real resistance. Then Revan returned, memory restored, identity reclaimed, but changed from who he'd been before. The Jedi's programming had broken when he confronted his past, and now he was something unique, a former Sith Lord who remembered both the light and dark, who understood both sides of the Force. The redeemed Revan was the only one who could stop Malak. He knew the Sith Empire's weaknesses because he'd built it. He knew the Starforge's vulnerabilities because he'd claimed it, and he had a personal score to settle with the apprentice who'd betrayed him. The final battle at the Starforge was apocalyptic. Republic and Jedi forces assaulted the station, while Malak threw everything he had at defending it. The Starforge itself was still producing ships even as the battle raged, creating this surreal situation where new enemy vessels kept appearing mid-combat. Revan fought through Malak's defenses and confronted him directly. In the end, Revan's understanding of both sides of the Force gave him the edge. Malak died, and with his last words, he admitted something tragic. He'd known he was weaker than Revan all along, and that knowledge had driven every terrible decision he'd made. The Starforge was destroyed. That infinite production, that reality-breaking weapon, reduced to debris. The Sith Empire collapsed without leadership or resources. Victory. The Republic had survived. The Sith were defeated. Everything should have been cause for celebration, except the Republic barely existed anymore. Thousands of worlds were devastated. Economies were shattered beyond quick repair. Governments were in shambles. The Senate that had failed so catastrophically during the crisis was still in charge, already returning to their old corrupt habits. Revan looked at what he'd accomplished and saw the bitter irony. He'd tried to strengthen the Republic by conquering it, and instead he'd nearly destroyed it. His redemption had saved the galaxy from Malak, but the true Sith threat he'd been preparing for was still out there, and the Republic was weaker than ever. So he disappeared again, back into the unknown regions, alone this time, to face the true Sith Emperor. He left behind a Republic that had won but felt like it had lost, a government that survived but couldn't govern effectively, and a galaxy that had no idea what he'd been trying to prepare them for. The question everyone asked was the same. What was Revan preparing us for? What threat was so terrible that he'd become a Sith Lord to ready the galaxy for it? Nobody knew, and that ignorance would cost them dearly in the years to come. Just when the Republic thought they could finally catch their breath after Malak's defeat, they discovered something worse. Not all the Sith Lords were dead. Some had survived by hiding, waiting, watching. And these survivors had a different approach to destroying the Jedi. They wouldn't build empires or command fleets. They'd just hunt. The Dark Wars weren't really wars in the traditional sense. There were no massive fleet battles. Instead, it was a campaign of targeted assassination and forced predation that nearly extinguished the Jedi Order completely. Darth Nihilus was the worst of them. This guy wasn't even really a person anymore. He was more like a wound in the Force that wore a mask and robes. Malachor V had done something to him, twisted him into a being that fed on Force energy the way normal people breathe air. He didn't conquer worlds, he consumed them. Literally drained all life from entire planets to satisfy his endless hunger. Every living thing, from people to animals to plants, just withered and died as he sucked their Force energy into himself. Whole civilizations vanished in hours, leaving nothing but dead rocks floating in space. Qatar was the most horrific example. A world populated by Miraluka, an entire species of Force sensitives. Nihilus sensed all that Force energy concentrated in one place and went there like a starving man to a feast. When he was done, every single person on Qatar was dead. Millions of Force-sensitive beings gone. The psychological impact on the Jedi was devastating. They'd thought Force sensitivity made them special, powerful, able to protect themselves. Nihilus proved it made them targets, beacons drawing a predator who fed on what made them unique. Then there was Darth Sion. This Sith Lord should have been dead 1,000 times over. His body was broken, held together purely through pain and hatred, channeled through the Force. He was literally too angry to die. You could cut him down and he'd just pull himself back together through sheer spite. Fighting Sion was psychological warfare as much as combat. How do you beat someone who won't stay dead? How do you maintain hope against an enemy who embodies the concept that suffering and hatred are stronger than death itself? These Sith Lords weren't interested in ruling the galaxy or building empires. They were hunting Jedi for sport, for sustenance, for revenge against the Order that represented everything they'd rejected. And the Republic couldn't fight them, because how do you mobilize against enemies you can't find, who strike without warning and disappear before reinforcements arrive? Jedi started going into hiding. Masters who'd survived the wars with Revan and Malak now abandoned their temples and cut themselves off from the Force, hoping that would make them invisible to predators like Nihilus. The Order that had existed for thousands of years was scattered, broken, reduced to individuals trying to survive. The Republic was defenseless without the Jedi, Local defense forces were useless against Force users who could kill from orbit or infiltrate anywhere. Political leaders had no idea how to respond to a threat they couldn't see or understand. The Senate tried forming committees to study the problem, while Jedi died one by one. Into this nightmare came Mitra Surik, the Jedi exile. Think about her situation for a second. She'd been exiled by the Jedi Council for following Revan to war, for making the choice that ultimately saved the Republic from the Mandalorians. She'd severed herself from the Force because the guilt of Malachor V was too much to bear, and now she was coming back to a galaxy that had moved on without her. The Republic didn't remember her. Citizens who benefited from the victory over the Mandalorians had no idea she existed. Her sacrifice at Malachor V, the trauma that had broken her connection to the Force, was forgotten footnote in histories that focused on Revan. She found a Republic that had stopped caring about the Outer Rim even more than before. The wars had drained resources from everywhere, but the core worlds recovered while frontier planets were abandoned to fend for themselves. The inequality that had always existed was now impossible to ignore. Traveling through Republic space, Surik saw poverty everywhere. Refugees from destroyed worlds living in slums, veterans of the wars begging on streets because the government they'd fought for couldn't be bothered to help them. Corporations exploiting desperate workers who had no other options. Surik gathered companions as she travelled, other outcasts and survivors, people who'd been forgotten or betrayed by the systems they'd trusted. A blind Sith Lord seeking redemption, a soldier haunted by Malachor V, a former Sith assassin trying to escape her past, outcasts helping an exile. Her perspective was unique because she saw the galaxy without the Force clouding her perception. Other Jedi were so connected to the Force that they sometimes missed the mundane reality of people's lives. Surik, cut off from the Force, saw things clearly. The Republic had failed its citizens long before the Sith showed up. The disillusionment she felt was profound. We fought for this. She'd sacrificed everything at Malachor V to save the Republic, and this was what survived? A government that abandoned its people, corporations that exploited everyone, and survivors who'd learned that loyalty to the Republic was a sucker's bet. But she kept going, partly because the remaining Jedi Masters needed her help against the Sith threat, partly because her companions depended on her, mostly because giving up meant accepting that Malachor had been pointless, that all those deaths meant nothing. The confrontations with Nihilus and Sion were more about opposing philosophies. Nihilus represented consumption, the dark side as endless hunger that destroys everything. Sion embodied suffering as power, pain as strength. Surik had to overcome both while barely reconnected to a Force she'd severed years ago. When the immediate Sith threat was finally ended, there was no celebration. The Jedi Order was reduced to a handful of survivors. The Republic was barely governing at all, and both institutions had to rebuild from almost nothing. The Jedi who remained started training new students, but carefully. The Order had nearly been destroyed 3 times in a century, by internal corruption during Exar Kun's rise, by Revan and Malak's betrayal, by the Sith assassins of the Dark Wars. They couldn't afford another catastrophic failure. This created an order that was more cautious, more conservative, more afraid of the dark side's influence. They tightened restrictions on what could be studied, who could be trained, how students were monitored. The Jedi became less willing to take risks or embrace new ideas. While the Republic was rebuilding from the Dark Wars, celebrating their survival, and pretending everything would be fine now, Revan was out in the unknown regions, fighting a war nobody else knew existed. And what he'd discovered out there made every threat the galaxy had faced look like a warm-up act. The unknown regions weren't called that because nobody had explored them. Plenty of explorers had tried. They were unknown because hyperspace in that part of the galaxy was a nightmare. Gravitational anomalies, stellar phenomena that disrupted navigation, regions where hyperspace routes just didn't work the way they should. Going out there was basically suicide for most navigators. But Revan had Mandalorian navigation charts from his war against them, plus his own Force abilities to guide him through impossible routes. He pushed deeper into regions where Republic explorers had never returned from, following hints and legends about something lurking beyond known space. What he found was the true Sith Empire, not the scattered remnants that occasionally threatened the Republic, not fallen Jedi playing at being Sith Lords, an actual empire that had existed continuously for over 1,300 years in complete isolation from the rest of the galaxy. The Sith who'd fled after the Great Hyperspace War hadn't just hidden, they'd rebuilt. They'd found new worlds in the unknown regions, established a power base on Dromund Kaas, and spent over a millennium preparing for their return. While the Republic was dealing with internal conflicts and minor Sith threats, the true Sith were building something terrifying, and ruling over all of it was the Sith Emperor. This being had so many names: Vitiate, Valkorion, others lost to history. But names didn't matter, because what he was transcended normal identity. He was evil distilled into a single, immortal consciousness, and understanding how he became that way is crucial to grasping the threat he represented. Over 1,500 years before Revan discovered him, this being was born on a planet called Nathuma. He was Force-sensitive from birth, powerful in ways that terrified his family. As a child, literally as a child, he performed dark side rituals. By the time he was a teenager, he'd already studied under Sith masters and surpassed them. He learned everything they could teach about the dark side and then went deeper, exploring applications of Force power that were considered taboo even among Sith. Then he performed a ritual that had never been attempted before and hasn't been matched since. He gathered the most powerful Sith Lords of his era, along with thousands of other Force sensitives, and told them he'd discovered the secret to ultimate power. They believed him because his strength was undeniable. The ritual began, and when it was done, every living thing on Nathuma was dead. Every plant, every animal, every microorganism. The planet's entire connection to the Force was severed. It became a void, a dead spot in the Force, where life itself was impossible. And he consumed all of it. The life force of billions of beings, the Force energy of an entire planet, channeled directly into himself in a single, apocalyptic moment. The power this gave him was beyond comprehension. He became functionally immortal, his lifespan extended indefinitely, his Force abilities amplified to godlike levels. Nathuma became a monument to his power and a warning about what he was capable of. The planet was still there, physically intact, but spiritually dead. Walking on its surface felt wrong in ways that couldn't be described, like stepping into a void where reality itself was broken. With this power, he conquered the remnants of the old Sith Empire that had fled the Republic. He didn't ask for their loyalty, he dominated them through sheer overwhelming strength. Sith Lords who'd ruled for decades submitted to him because resistance meant instant death. He established his capital on Dromund Kaas, a world shrouded in perpetual storms and darkness. The planet itself seemed to reflect his nature, violent, oppressive, hostile to life. He built a massive citadel there, a fortress temple that served as the center of his empire. His philosophy was different from traditional Sith thinking. Other Sith Lords talked about using passion to fuel power, about dominating others to prove strength. The Emperor saw the dark side as consumption itself. Existence was about devouring, absorbing, taking everything until nothing remained but yourself. He didn't rule the Sith Empire, he owned it. Every citizen was a resource to be used. Every planet was fuel for his rituals. Every Sith Lord in his service was a tool that could be discarded when no longer useful. There was no pretense of meritocracy or strength-based hierarchy, just absolute domination by an immortal tyrant. The Dark Council was established to manage day-to-day operations. 12 Sith Lords, who theoretically ruled the Empire's various spheres of influence, military, intelligence, expansion, production, all divided among council members who schemed and betrayed each other constantly. But they all knew the truth. The Emperor could kill any of them with a thought. Their power games were entertainment for him, a way to keep them focused on each other instead of challenging his rule. The Dark Council only existed because he allowed it to exist. The society he created on Dromund Kaas and other Sith worlds was structured around fear and death. Public executions weren't punishment, they were demonstrations of power. Citizens were taught from birth that they existed to serve the Empire and the Emperor, that individual life had no value except in how it contributed to Sith strength. Sith sorcery was used to enforce loyalty. Rituals that bound people to obedience, dark side techniques that could detect disloyalty, methods of torture that broke minds without killing bodies. The Empire ran on terror, enforced through supernatural means. Imperial citizens were indoctrinated so thoroughly that most genuinely believed the Empire was superior to the Republic. They'd been taught that democracy was weakness, that freedom was chaos, that only through absolute submission to strength could civilization survive. And for many of them, the indoctrination worked. The military was massive and disciplined. Soldiers trained from childhood, officers promoted based on ruthless competence, fleets built over centuries of preparation. The Empire had been planning its eventual assault on the Republic for over 1,000 years, and every aspect of their society was optimized for war. The Emperor's long-term plan was patient beyond human comprehension. He could afford to wait centuries for the perfect moment to strike because he was immortal. While Republic politicians worried about next election cycles and Jedi Masters planned in terms of decades, he thought in terms of millennia. But he wasn't content with just ruling the Sith Empire. His true goal was far more horrific. He wanted to consume all life in the galaxy. The ritual he'd performed on Nathema could be replicated on a galactic scale if he had enough power and the right conditions. Imagine it, every living being in the galaxy drained of life force simultaneously, channeled into a single entity. The Emperor would become something beyond comprehension, a god being fueled by the death of trillions. The galaxy would become an empty void with him at its center, immortal and omnipotent in a dead universe. This was what Revan discovered, an immortal monster who'd successfully performed a genocide ritual once and planned to do it again on an unimaginable scale. Revan tried to stop him alone. Stupid, brave, desperate, all of those things. He infiltrated the Sith Empire, learned its secrets, and eventually confronted the Emperor directly, planning to kill him before the invasion could begin. The fight wasn't even close. The Emperor had over 1,000 years of accumulated power, knowledge that Revan couldn't match, and abilities that went beyond normal Force use. Revan was one of the most powerful Force users of his generation, a tactical genius, someone who'd defeated Mandalore and built a Sith Empire of his own. The Emperor crushed him effortlessly, but he didn't kill Revan. That would have been wasteful. Instead, he imprisoned him and did something far worse. He tried to break Revan's mind, to turn him into a servant, to use his knowledge of the Republic for the eventual invasion. Revan's mind became a battleground. Part of him was dominated by the Emperor, forced to give up information about Republic defenses, hyperspace routes, strategic weak points. But another part of him resisted, fought back through sheer stubborn will, even while imprisoned and tortured. This mental battle lasted for 3 centuries, 300 years of Revan fighting inside his own mind, trying to resist the Emperor's domination, while part of him was being used to plan the Republic's destruction. During this time, the Emperor used Revan's knowledge to refine his invasion plans. The Republic's weaknesses, their military structures, their political divisions, all of it extracted from Revan's mind and incorporated into Sith strategy. But Revan's resistance did something the Emperor didn't expect. It delayed the invasion. The part of Revan still fighting created subtle mental interference, tiny acts of sabotage in the information he was forced to provide. Not enough to alert the Emperor, but enough to slow things down, to buy the Republic time they didn't know they needed. The Sith Empire continued preparing. Fleets were built in secret shipyards. Soldiers were trained in tactics designed specifically to counter Jedi. Spies were infiltrated into Republic space, gathering intelligence and waiting for the signal to strike. The Dark Council schemed beneath the Emperor's shadow. Some wanted the invasion to begin immediately, eager to prove themselves in glorious conquest. Others counseled patience, arguing that more preparation would guarantee victory. All of them knew better than to question the Emperor's ultimate timeline. And through it all, the Emperor conducted his dark side rituals, experiments in consuming life force, testing the limits of his power, preparing for the day when he'd perform his ultimate ritual. Entire worlds in Sith space were depopulated in these experiments, their populations sacrificed to fuel his research. The true Sith Empire was a nightmare made manifest. The year was 3681 BBY, and the Republic had enjoyed relative peace for about 3 centuries. Sure, there were minor conflicts, political squabbles, the usual corruption and bureaucratic nonsense, but nothing like the catastrophic wars they'd survived before. The Jedi Order had rebuilt to respectable numbers. The economy was stable. Life was pretty good if you lived in the core. Then the Sith fleet emerged from hyperspace, and everything went to hell. The Tingle Arm, a whole section of space on the rim, fell within weeks, not months, not after prolonged campaigns. Weeks. The Republic forces stationed there didn't stand a chance, because they had no idea this enemy even existed. Entire sectors were conquered before anyone on Coruscant fully understood what was happening. The Sith had spent over a millennium preparing for this moment. They knew Republic military doctrine inside and out, partially thanks to information extracted from Revan's mind. They knew where the defenses were weak, which systems were strategically critical, how to maximize chaos with minimal initial force. Republic outposts sent distress signals that took days to reach the core. By the time the Senate received word that they were under attack, the territories that sent those signals were already under Sith control. The communication lag alone gave the Empire weeks of unopposed conquest. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was still standing tall, confident in its strength and the Order's ability to handle any threat. The Council had learned from past wars. They'd built contingency plans, trained more combat-focused Jedi, established rapid response teams. They were ready for another Mandalorian invasion, or a rogue Sith cult. They were not ready for the true Sith Empire. Sattel Shan was a young Jedi at this time, already showing incredible promise. She and her master were on Korriban investigating reports of strange activity in the old Sith tombs. What they found was an entire Sith occupation force that had been there for who knows how long, preparing for the invasion. The mission was supposed to be reconnaissance. Instead, it became a desperate escape as they realized they'd walked into the heart of enemy territory right as the war was starting. The confrontation there cost Darach his life. He sacrificed himself so Sattel could escape with the knowledge of what they'd discovered. Sattel made it back to Republic space and reported what she'd seen. The scale of the Sith military, the organization, the fact that they'd been occupying ancient Sith worlds for years while the Republic had no idea. The Temple Council realized immediately that this wasn't another small conflict they could handle quietly. The Republic tried to mobilize, but they were so unprepared it was almost comical. The military hadn't fought a real war in 3 centuries. Most of their forces were designed for peacekeeping and anti-piracy operations, not full-scale warfare against a peer adversary. Soldiers who'd signed up for safe careers suddenly found themselves shipped to war zones. Officers with no combat experience were commanding fleets. The whole military apparatus was designed for a galaxy at peace, and retooling it for total war took time they didn't have. The Senate descended into predictable chaos. Representatives screamed at each other about whose fault this was, whose sectors should receive priority protection, who should pay for the war effort. Emergency sessions lasted for days with minimal productive output. The core worlds panicked because for the first time in millennia, they realized they weren't safe. Previous wars had been fought on the rim or in distant sectors, but the Sith were advancing fast, and the mathematical reality was clear. If they weren't stopped, they'd reach the core eventually. Public morale collapsed. Citizens who'd grown up believing the Republic was eternal and Coruscant was untouchable now watched news reports of system after system falling to an enemy they'd never heard of. The psychological impact was devastating. The Jedi deployed in force, leading Republic military units because experienced combat commanders were in short supply. Jedi who'd spent their lives as diplomats and scholars suddenly found themselves commanding battalions, making life or death tactical decisions, watching soldiers die under their command. Years passed, then a decade. The war became normalized. An entire generation grew up knowing nothing but conflict. Soldiers spent their entire careers fighting the same enemy. Jedi Masters who'd been Padawans when the war started were now leading strike teams. 28 years. The war lasted 28 years, making it the longest continuous conflict in Republic history. Entire planets were devastated and rebuilt only to be devastated again. Economic systems adapted to permanent wartime production. Families were torn apart by casualties and military deployments. Both sides tried negotiation, multiple times, but talks always broke down. The Sith demanded territory. The Republic wouldn't cede. The Republic demanded withdrawals the Empire wouldn't accept. Neither side was willing to compromise enough to end the bloodshed. Then the Sith played their masterstroke. They proposed peace talks on Alderaan, neutral ground, formal negotiations, both sides bringing delegations to finally hash out a treaty. The Republic was exhausted after nearly 3 decades of war. The prospect of peace was too tempting to refuse. What they didn't know was that the peace talks were a distraction. While diplomats argued on Alderaan, Sith strike teams were already infiltrating Coruscant. The sacking of Coruscant was the most audacious military operation in galactic history. While the Republic's attention was focused on peace negotiations, Sith ships dropped out of hyperspace directly above the capital. The defenses were strong. Coruscant had been fortified extensively during the war, but the Sith weren't trying to win through orbital bombardment. Their fleet was there to create chaos and cover for what was really happening. Ground teams were already inside the city. Infiltrators had been positioned over weeks or months, waiting for the signal. When the fleet arrived, they struck simultaneously across the planet. Communications networks went down, defense grids were sabotaged, strategic locations were seized before defenders even understood they were under attack. The Jedi Temple was the primary target. This wasn't symbolic, it was strategic. The temple housed the most powerful Jedi, contained millennia of accumulated knowledge, and served as the spiritual heart of the Order. Destroying it would cripple Jedi morale and eliminate their best defenders in one strike. Sith warriors stormed the temple in waves. They'd studied its layout, knew its defenses, brought overwhelming force specifically designed to counter Jedi abilities. The defenders fought desperately, but they were caught off guard and outnumbered. Jedi Masters died defending the temple's halls. Younglings were evacuated through secret passages while knights bought them time with their lives. The archives, containing thousands of years of knowledge, were ransacked. Sith Lords personally led assaults on the temple's most sacred chambers. Fire spread through the upper levels. The architecture that had stood for millennia crumbled under orbital strikes coordinated with the ground assault. The sight of the Jedi Temple burning could be seen from orbit, a psychological blow as devastating as the military one. Meanwhile, Sith forces hit the Senate building. They didn't destroy it, they occupied it. Squads of Sith warriors marched into the Senate chamber and executed senators on camera. Not all of them. Just enough to make the point. Your government can't protect you. Satele Shan, now a senior Jedi, was on Coruscant when it happened. She fought through the chaos, trying to save who she could, watching her home destroyed around her. The temple where she'd trained, the city she'd grown up in, the civilization she'd sworn to protect, all of it burning while she was powerless to stop it. The Republic military tried to respond, but the Sith controlled orbital space and had sabotaged ground defenses. Reinforcements couldn't land safely. Commanders couldn't coordinate because communications were compromised. It was chaos compounded by betrayal, compounded by shock. And on Alderaan, the peace talks continued. Republic negotiators had no idea what was happening on Coruscant until Sith diplomats showed them footage. "This is happening right now," they said, "and it will continue until you accept our terms." The terms were brutal. The Republic would cede half the galaxy to the Sith Empire, everything they'd conquered, plus significant additional territory. The Republic would pay massive reparations. Their military would be limited in size and capability. Essentially, surrender disguised as a peace treaty. The Supreme Chancellor refused. He wouldn't sign away half the Republic, wouldn't legitimize conquest through diplomatic paperwork. So the Sith sent more footage, more senators executed, more civilians killed, more of Coruscant burning. Hours passed, the death toll mounted. The Jedi Temple collapsed in sections, crushing defenders and attackers alike under tons of rubble. Entire city blocks were reduced to craters. The Senate building became a Sith stronghold where Republic senators were held hostage. Finally, the Republic delegation broke. They signed. Everything the Sith demanded, they got. Half the galaxy, the reparations, the military restrictions, all of it. The Treaty of Coruscant was signed while Coruscant itself was still under attack. The Sith forces withdrew as soon as the treaty was ratified, leaving behind a devastated capital and a broken government. Millions of Republic citizens woke up the next day to discover they were now living under Sith rule. The Supreme Chancellor resigned in shame. He'd signed the treaty to save lives, to stop the slaughter, but he couldn't live with what that decision meant. His replacement inherited a republic that had been cut in half and forced to pay tribute to its conquerors. The Jedi Temple lay in ruins. The Order had been devastated. Masters who'd survived felt the weight of failure. The Republic and Sith Empire had been in their Cold War for decades. Everyone assumed the next war would be between these two familiar enemies, just round two of the same fight. Nobody in known space had ever heard of Zakuul. This empire existed in wild space, the regions beyond even the Outer Rim, in areas so remote that Republic explorers had never reached them. And they'd been there the whole time, building, growing, developing technology that made both the Republic and Sith Empire look primitive. The Sith Emperor, the immortal monster who'd ruled the Sith for over 1,000 years. He'd been ruling Zakuul simultaneously. Same consciousness, different body, different name. On Dromund Kaas, he was the terrifying tyrant who consumed worlds. On Zakuul, he was Valkorion, the revered immortal emperor who'd guided his people to unprecedented prosperity. He'd literally been playing both sides, building two entirely separate empires with completely different philosophies. The Sith Empire was built on fear and domination. Zakuul was built on order and technological supremacy. Same ruler, two entirely different approaches to control. Zakuul's technology was beyond anything the galaxy had seen. Their weapons, their ships, their infrastructure, all of it generations ahead of Republic or Sith equivalents. They'd had centuries of peaceful development, while the rest of the galaxy was tearing itself apart in endless wars. The Eternal Fleet was their trump card, a massive armada of droid ships, controlled through the Force, hundreds of vessels that didn't need crews, couldn't be negotiated with, didn't tire or fear or hesitate, just relentless automated warships that followed orders with perfect precision. When Zakuul revealed itself to the galaxy, it wasn't through diplomacy or gradual contact. It was through conquest. The Eternal Empire began expanding into known space, and neither the Republic nor the Sith Empire could stop them. The Eternal Fleet hit both sides simultaneously. Sith worlds that had withstood Republic assaults for decades fell to Zakuul in days. Republic systems, with sophisticated defenses, were overwhelmed by technology they couldn't counter. It wasn't even close. Zakuul was operating on a different level entirely. The Republic and Sith tried fighting back separately at first, each assuming they could handle this new threat the way they'd handled everything else. They were wrong. Fleets sent against the Eternal Fleet didn't just lose, they were annihilated. Entire armadas destroyed without the enemy taking meaningful casualties. Then came the moment that changed everything. The Outlander appeared. This individual's story is complex, involving time displacement and Force visions, but what mattered was they became the focal point of resistance against Zakuul, a wild card that neither the Republic nor Sith could control. The Outlander managed something unprecedented. They killed Valkorion, not physically at first, but spiritually. They confronted him within the Force itself and defeated his consciousness. The immortal Emperor, who'd ruled for over 1,500 years, who'd survived everything the galaxy threw at him, was finally ended, except his death created immediate chaos. The Sith Empire suddenly had no emperor. The leadership structure that had existed for over a millennium evaporated overnight. The Dark Council tried to maintain control, but without the Emperor's overwhelming power holding everything together, the Empire started fragmenting. Zakuul had similar problems. Valkorion's children tried to claim succession, but they'd been living in their father's shadow their entire lives. None of them commanded the same respect or possessed the same power. The Eternal Empire started experiencing internal conflicts as different factions vied for control. The Outlander exploited this chaos brilliantly. They built alliances between Republic and Sith forces, enemies who'd been killing each other for generations, suddenly working together because the alternative was subjugation by Zakuul. The cooperation was grudging and fragile, but it was real. The campaign against the Eternal Empire took years. Sabotage operations, fleet actions, political maneuvering, everything required to fight a technologically superior enemy. The Outlander became a symbol of resistance, a rallying point for everyone who refused to submit to Zakuul's rule. The final confrontation involved taking control of the Eternal Fleet itself. The fleet's command structure was vulnerable to someone strong enough in the Force to dominate it. The Outlander managed exactly that, turning Zakuul's greatest weapon against them. With the Eternal Fleet under new control and Valkorion definitively dead, his spirit finally destroyed after trying to possess the Outlander, the Eternal Empire collapsed. The government on Zakuul disintegrated, their subject worlds rebelled, and their brief period of galactic dominance ended. But here's the thing about collapsing empires. They leave power vacuums. And power vacuums in a galaxy that's been at war for decades create absolute chaos. The Republic was a shell of what it had been. Decades of warfare, the humiliation of the Treaty of Coruscant, losses to Zakuul, all of it had drained their resources and credibility. Member worlds that had stayed loyal through everything were now questioning whether the Republic could actually protect them. The Sith Empire was even worse off. The Emperor who'd ruled for over a millennium was gone. The Dark Council was splintering into factions. Sith Lords across the Empire saw opportunity. With no supreme authority to enforce unity, why not carve out their own domains? Both governments were technically still standing, but barely. They had the infrastructure, the bureaucracy, the official recognition. What they didn't have was real authority or the ability to project power effectively. Worlds across the galaxy looked at this situation and made logical decisions. They declared independence. Why stay loyal to a republic that couldn't protect you, or a Sith Empire that was eating itself? Better to handle your own defense, make your own treaties, control your own destiny. The Sith Empire went through a brutal consolidation period. Weaker Sith Lords were eliminated by stronger ones. Territories were divided and redivided through conquest and betrayal. What emerged wasn't the unified empire Vitiate had ruled, but a loose confederation of Sith-controlled domains barely cooperating with each other. The Jedi and Sith orders both survived, but were diminished. The Jedi had lost credibility through their inability to prevent any of these disasters. The Sith had lost their Emperor, and with him the structure that had kept them unified. Both orders retreated to core strongholds and tried to rebuild. This chaotic period lasted about a decade. 10 years of instability, small wars, shifting borders, emerging and collapsing governments. It was exhausting for everyone involved. Populations just wanted stability. Any kind of stability, even if it came from imperfect sources. Eventually, new leadership emerged in both the Republic and Empire. People who'd risen through the chaos, who understood the new reality, who had fresh ideas about how to govern in a galaxy that had fundamentally changed. The Sith Empire coalesced under a new Dark Council that actually functioned through cooperation rather than constant backstabbing. They'd learned that endless internal conflict made them vulnerable to external threats. The new empire was still brutal and authoritarian, but more stable than what had come before. An exhausted peace settled over the galaxy. The galaxy that emerged from this collapse and recovery was unrecognizable from what had existed just decades before. The certainties that had defined galactic civilization were gone. In their place was a messy, chaotic, but undeniably alive landscape where anything seemed possible. And both the Republic and Sith Empire, diminished but surviving, faced a new challenge. How do you maintain relevance in a galaxy that's learned it doesn't need you? Around 2000 BBY, the galaxy looked at its recent history of chaos and instability and thought, you know what? Let's make this worse, because that's essentially what the new Sith Wars were, 1,000 years of constant warfare that made every previous conflict look organized by comparison. The new Sith Wars didn't start with one empire declaring war on another. They started with multiple Sith factions emerging simultaneously across the galaxy. Dark side users who'd been waiting, studying, building power in secret, all of them choosing roughly the same time to make their moves. These weren't unified under one Sith Emperor or following one coherent philosophy. These were dozens of separate Sith Lords, each with their own army, their own territory, their own vision of how they'd rule the galaxy. Some were former Jedi who'd fallen. Others were trained by survivors of previous Sith empires. A few just discovered dark side knowledge on their own and ran with it. The Republic was still recovering from the previous disasters and was completely unprepared for this. They demilitarized again because politicians always assume peace will last forever. So when Sith armies started conquering worlds, the Republic had almost nothing to throw at them. What made this worse was the fractured nature of the threat. The Republic couldn't focus all their resources on defeating one enemy because there were 50 enemies, all operating independently. Defeating one Sith Lord's army didn't end the war. It just meant you could move on to fighting the next one. The Republic itself started fragmenting under the pressure. Regional governors looked at the Senate's inability to respond effectively and decided to handle things themselves. Some declared independence, others formed regional alliances. A few even made deals with local Sith Lords. Trading loyalty for protection against other Sith, entire sectors stopped recognizing Coruscant's authority. They'd send token representation to the Senate, but ignore any orders they didn't like. The Republic was theoretically still governing thousands of worlds, but in practice, it only controlled what it could directly defend. The Jedi Order watched this disintegration and made a hard choice. They couldn't be peacekeepers and diplomats anymore. There was no peace to keep and nobody to diplomatically engage with. They needed to become soldiers, to form an actual army and fight. Lord Hoth was the Jedi who made this happen. He was a master who looked at the traditional Jedi approach, small teams operating independently, avoiding military command, trusting in the Force, and said that doesn't work against this threat. We need organization, hierarchy, unified command. So he created the Army of Light. Not Jedi leading Republic forces, but an actual Jedi military organization. He recruited everyone who could fight, Jedi Knights and Masters obviously, but also Padawans barely old enough for combat, Republic soldiers who'd fight under Jedi command, volunteers from worlds desperate for protection. The Army of Light was unlike anything the Jedi Order had ever created. They had ranks, military structure, strategic planning sessions. Hoth himself became a general in the truest sense, commanding thousands of troops, making tactical decisions, operating like a warlord rather than a spiritual leader. This transformation troubled many Jedi. The Order was supposed to be about peace, wisdom, service to the Force. Now they had Jedi Masters planning military campaigns, Padawans training primarily for combat, entire temples converted into military bases. When does a peacekeeper become just another warlord? Hoth knew the contradiction. He wasn't blind to what this was doing to the Order, but he also knew that if the Jedi didn't fight this way, they'd lose, and losing meant the Sith would dominate the galaxy completely. So he made the choice to compromise Jedi principles to preserve the Jedi's ability to eventually return to those principles. The Army of Light started winning battles. Hoth was genuinely brilliant at military strategy, and having Force-sensitive commanders coordinating through the Force gave them advantages no normal army could match. They pushed back against multiple Sith factions, reclaimed lost territory, gave the Republic breathing room. But decades of constant warfare were changing the Jedi who fought. Masters who'd spent their whole careers in the Army of Light knew more about tactics and warfare than about meditation and philosophy. They were warriors first, Jedi second. The disconnect from the Order's original purpose was growing. Meanwhile, on the Sith side, something unprecedented was happening. Lord Khan looked at the traditional Sith structure, masters and apprentices constantly betraying each other, infighting, weakening them against external enemies, and had an epiphany. What if Sith could cooperate? The Brotherhood of Darkness was his answer. He gathered Sith Lords and proposed a radical idea. No more masters and apprentices. No more hierarchy. They were all Dark Lords, all equal, working together against their common enemy, the Jedi. It was a complete lie, obviously. Khan was manipulating everyone, positioning himself as first among equals while claiming there were no ranks. But the lie worked because the Sith who joined wanted it to work. They were tired of losing because they kept stabbing each other in the back. For the first time in history, Sith Lords actually cooperated consistently. They shared resources, coordinated strategies, supported each other's campaigns. The Brotherhood became terrifyingly effective because they combined Sith power with actual, organized military strategy. The Republic was caught between two military forces that had both abandoned traditional limitations. The Jedi had become an army, the Sith had learned cooperation, and the fighting just escalated. Wars merged into each other with no clear beginning or end. A battle on one world would spawn conflicts on a dozen others. Ceasefires would collapse within weeks. Peace negotiations became traps where both sides tried to assassinate each other's diplomats. Entire generations knew only war. People born during the new Sith Wars grew up, had children, and died without ever experiencing peace. Soldiers served their entire careers fighting the same enemy, retiring and having their children join the same war they'd fought. The economic impact was staggering. Entire planets converted to war production because it was the only economy that functioned reliably. Factories that had made consumer goods retooled for weapons manufacturing. Agricultural worlds focused on feeding armies rather than general populations. This created a perverse situation. Both sides needed the war to continue because their economies depended on it. Weapons manufacturers had become the largest employers. Stopping the war meant economic collapse for millions of workers. The galaxy was trapped in a cycle it had created. The corporate lobbying was blatant. Companies that profited from warfare funded senators, bribed military officers, sabotaged peace initiatives. They'd spread propaganda about how the enemy was still dangerous, how victory was just around the corner, how maintaining military readiness was essential. And it worked. Populations that should have been demanding peace were convinced that total victory was possible if they just kept fighting a little longer. The same lie repeated for generations until people believed it was truth. Both the Army of Light and the Brotherhood of Darkness realized they couldn't win through normal warfare. The conflict had reached a stalemate. Neither side strong enough to destroy the other, neither weak enough to surrender. They needed a decisive battle, something that would break the deadlock. That battle happened on Ruusan, a relatively unimportant planet that became the graveyard for thousands of Jedi and Sith. The Ruusan campaign wasn't one battle, it was 7 major engagements over the course of a century. Both sides poured forces into this single planet, fought massive battles, regrouped, and fought again. The planet became a symbol. Whoever controlled Ruusan would claim psychological victory, but nobody could hold it. The Jedi would win a battle and occupy the planet. The Sith would counterattack and retake it. Back and forth, over and over, each battle building on the literal corpses of previous battles. The surface of Ruusan became a nightmare. Layers of bones from soldiers who died decades apart. Battlefields where you fought on ground composed of previous battlefields. Scorch marks from lightsabers covering scorch marks from earlier fights. The planet itself was dying from the concentrated, dark side corruption and mass death. Neither side could retreat without admitting defeat. The Jedi had committed too much, too many lives, too much prestige, too many promises that this would be the final victory. The Sith were equally trapped by pride and the knowledge that losing Ruusan meant the Brotherhood would collapse from internal recriminations. So they kept fighting. Soldiers who'd survived multiple battles became veterans teaching the next wave how to survive. Strategic positions changed hands so many times that both sides had defensive plans for places they'd occupied and attacked dozens of times. The civilian population had evacuated after the first few battles. Ruusan became purely a military planet, just warriors and corpses, fighting over land that had no strategic value beyond the symbolic. Lord Hoth knew this couldn't continue. 100 years of fighting on one planet while the galaxy burned elsewhere was insane. But he also knew that retreating would destroy the Army of Light's morale and probably lead to the Jedi losing the overall war. Lord Khan was facing similar problems. The Brotherhood of Darkness was holding together, but barely. Sith Lords were questioning why they kept throwing forces into Ruusan's meat grinder. Khan needed a decisive victory to maintain his authority. Both leaders, independently, came to the same conclusion. They needed a superweapon, something that would end this in one stroke. Khan found it in forbidden Sith knowledge, the Thought Bomb, a weapon that didn't destroy matter but annihilated Force-sensitive spirits. Detonate it on Ruusan, and every Jedi and Sith on the planet would die, their souls ripped from their bodies and trapped in the bomb's energy field forever. The ethical calculation was brutal. Khan would sacrifice his own Sith warriors along with the Jedi, but the Brotherhood had more Force users in reserve. The Jedi didn't. Losing everyone on Ruusan would cripple the Army of Light beyond recovery. Lord Hoth learned about the thought bomb through spies. He could have retreated, saved his forces, lived to fight another day. Instead, he made an impossible choice. He led his Jedi into the trap, knowingly. His reasoning was cold with logic, wrapped in sacrifice. If the Sith were willing to use the thought bomb here, they'd use it elsewhere. Better to trigger it on Ruusan, where it would kill Sith along with Jedi, than let them deploy it against undefended Jedi temples or populated worlds. The final battle of Ruusan was apocalyptic. Jedi and Sith clashing across the planet's surface, both sides knowing this was the end. Hoth led from the front, a Jedi Master who'd become a warlord, fighting like one to the last moment. Khan activated the thought bomb. The detonation wasn't physical, it was spiritual. Every Force-sensitive being on Ruusan felt their connection to the Force twist, invert, and then rip their consciousness from their body. The screaming in the Force was heard across the galaxy. Jedi in distant temples collapsed from the psychic shock. Sith Lords light years away felt the disturbance. Hundreds of Force spirits torn from life and trapped in a cave on Ruusan, screaming in eternal torment. Lord Hoth died with his enemy. The Army of Light was destroyed. The Brotherhood of Darkness was annihilated. In one instant, both the largest Jedi military force and the most unified Sith organization in history ceased to exist. The aftermath was eerie silence. Ships in orbit waited for orders from commanders who were dead. Ground forces not caught in the blast wandered the battlefield, looking for leadership that didn't exist. Both sides had decapitated themselves. But one Sith survived. Darth Bane had been observing from a distance, studying the battle, and he'd realized something crucial. The Sith would always fail as long as they worked together. The dark side was about individual power, and diluting that across dozens of Sith Lords made them weaker, not stronger. He watched the thought bomb detonate and felt no grief. He felt opportunity. The Brotherhood of Darkness had proven his theory. They'd cooperated, and cooperation led them to mutual destruction. The traditional Sith way of constant betrayal was actually correct. They'd just been implementing it wrong. Bane formulated a new philosophy, sitting in the ruins of Ruusan. The rule of two: one master to hold power, one apprentice to crave it. When the apprentice was strong enough to kill the master, they'd take their place and train a new apprentice. This ensured the Sith would always grow stronger through each generation. No more armies, no more empires, no more grand fleets and planetary conquests. The Sith would hide in shadows, infiltrate the Republic, corrupt it from within. They'd be patient, waiting centuries or millennia if necessary, until the perfect moment to strike. The Jedi declared the Sith extinct after Ruusan. They'd killed all the Brotherhood, destroyed their bases, eliminated every known Sith they could find. Mission accomplished. The threat was over, exactly as Bane wanted. Let the Jedi think they'd won. Let them relax their vigilance. Let them forget that the Sith existed. That complacency would be their downfall. Bane took an apprentice and disappeared into the galaxy. The Sith lineage continued, but invisibly. Master training apprentice, apprentice eventually killing master and taking their own apprentice. Each generation learning from the last, growing stronger, more knowledgeable, more patient. The thought bomb on Ruusan left a permanent scar. The cave where it detonated became a wound in the Force. Force spirits trapped there couldn't move on, couldn't escape, just existed in eternal torment. The planet itself became cursed. Any Force-sensitive who visited could hear the screaming. The Republic looked at the devastation and decided massive reforms were needed. Chancellor Tarsus Valorum led the Ruusan Reformation, a complete restructuring of Republic government and the Jedi's role in it. The Jedi were forbidden from having military forces ever again. The Army of Light was officially disbanded, though most of its members had died on Ruusan. Jedi would return to being peacekeepers and diplomats, not soldiers. They'd advise the Republic, but not command its armies. New constitution, new ideals, new promises. We've learned from our mistakes, the reformers proclaimed. We'll build a better Republic, one that can maintain peace through wisdom rather than force. The rule of two had begun. The Sith would spend the next 1,000 years corrupting the Republic from within, positioning pieces for the ultimate endgame. And when they finally struck, the Jedi and Republic would never see it coming, because they'd convinced themselves the threat didn't exist.